We talked in our last module about how macroevolution, or evolution on a large scale, is either through speciation, which is the formation of new species, or extinction, where we see the disappearance of species. So we're going to look at what happens to cause a species to go extinct. Generally, it's when there's been a change in the environmental conditions, and if that species cannot adapt quick enough, then we see their disappearance. So some of the major factors, continental drift, or the movement of continents, causes climate changes that the species cannot adapt to. Gradual climate changes, like our periods of global warming and periods of ice ages, if a species cannot adapt to the climate change, one example would be the woolly mammoth that was present during the last ice age, and then as our Earth has warmed, they were not able to adapt. And then if we experience a rapid climate change, one example would be 65 million years ago when we think an asteroid hit Earth, which would have sent dust into the atmosphere, blocked sunlight, cooled temperatures, and that could have led to the extinction of the dinosaurs. Now, we always have what we call background extinction, which is the disappearance of species at a low gradual rate, and this is something that has happened since the Earth has been around. A mass extinction is any time that the extinction rate rises above that background level, and we have more species than normal that are disappearing. Usually they're catastrophic, and you see large numbers of species worldwide being eliminated. When this happens, after a mass extinction, we have what is called adaptive radiation. We have a few species left, and so everything is going to evolve from those few species. All right, it's the combination of speciation and extinction that creates biodiversity. And we know that since humans have been on Earth, we have had an impact and actually are decreasing biodiversity. Because what happens is we're preventing speciation from happening, and we're increasing the extinction rate. There have been 5 major extinctions in Earth's history. The last one was the one I just mentioned, that was 65 million years ago. The question is, has a 6th mass extinction already started? So remember, if we are above the background extinction rate, then that is defined as a mass extinction. So the natural rate extinction, that background extinction rate, is about 3 to 14 species per year, and that's just based on what we've learned from the fossil record. Also, we've determined that about 99.9% of all species that have ever existed on Earth are now extinct. And if you think back to that timeline that we looked at, how life has evolved over the last 4.6 billion years, we saw how humans were right there at the present. We haven't been around that long at all. All right, so if we rise above that level, that background extinction level, and in the past it's been global climate change, and they're usually about 20 to 60 million of years apart. And then after that mass extinction, we have our adaptive radiation, which is going to be a period of time where we're actually increasing diversity. So looking at this geologic timeline, you can see where the red circles are. Those are the 5 mass extinctions that we have had. And notice that they usually indicate the end of an era or the end of a period. Some of the causes for those 5 mass extinctions, on the continental we have flood basalt lava, where the continents were rifting and moving apart. We saw falls in sea levels when we were experiencing ice ages. Could be asteroid impacts. Now, remember we said the background extinction rate was about 3 to 14 species per year. Today, species are becoming extinct at a rate of about 4,000 per year, so roughly 100 per day, or if you break that down even further, 1 species every 15 minutes. So we can say that yes, we are experiencing a mass extinction. By 2050, about 50% of all the species that exist today on the planet will either be endangered or extinct. That's assuming that human population continues to grow and we continue using resources and degrading habitats at the same rate. So of those species that exist today, about 25% of those are the mammal species, 15 are bird species. So the big difference between the current and the past mass extinctions are that we are the major cause of the current mass extinction. It's happening much faster, a few decades rather than a few thousands of years. A lot of our past mass extinctions took a long time. They're slow processes. And the reason being is that we are eliminating these environments, these biologically diverse environments, by deforestation, bleaching of the coral reefs that comes from rising ocean temperatures, draining our wetlands, polluting our wetlands. These are areas that usually were centers for recovery after the mass extinctions. Now, moving on from extinctions, we classify species as being either endangered or threatened. Those are two different classifications. If they are endangered, there are so few individual survivors that they could soon be extinct. One example is the giant panda, as you see here. They're a specialist species. They only eat bamboo, so any specialist species is going to be more likely to be endangered. The second example is the California condor. You can see it's a very attractive bird. Now, to be considered threatened, they're still abundant in their natural range, unlike endangered, which has very few individuals, but we do see a decline in their numbers, and if something is not done, then they are likely to become endangered in the near future. So two examples of threatened species, the grizzly bear and the American alligator. Now, some species are more vulnerable than others to extinction. If they have a low reproductive rate, which means they only have a few children or a few offspring at a time, and then a lot of time passes in between offspring. So usually those are our mammals. If they have a specialized niche, if they only eat a certain thing, like our pandas, or the kite was another example. If they have a narrow distribution, which means if they're only found in a few places to begin with. So a lot of our island species that only exist on that particular island are very vulnerable to being threatened or endangered. If there are higher trophic level feeders, like tigers, bald eagles, grizzly bears, we already know that they're few in number because 10% of energy is passed through each trophic level, so there's not the energy there for them to consume. If they have a fixed migratory pattern, certain birds, turtles, and then something happens to affect their migration. If they are rare, so once again, a lot of our island species that only exist on certain islands, or even the rainforests are very diverse. A lot of times there's only a few individuals of each species. These orchids would be one example. If they're commercially valuable, meaning that they're hunted or poached, tigers for their fur, elephants for their tusks, rhinos for their horns. And then those that have large territories. California condor, once again. Florida panther is another example. We do have some governmental and non-governmental organizations in place. Examples of governmental is UNEP, and then the EPA would be our United States Environmental Protection Agency. Now, if there are governmental organizations, they can pass laws and they can enforce those laws, which is different from our non-governmental. They cannot pass legislation. They are lobbyists. They can influence legislation. But benefits to our non-governmental is they can raise a lot of awareness. They can do things on a much quicker time scale. Legislation takes time. They also tend to do things that are not legal to raise awareness. So the World Wildlife Federation is an example, Greenpeace. Other solutions, some of the things that we have done to protect species are treaties. The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or CITES, in 1975. What that did, it created a list of over 800 species that cannot be commercially traded, and this is international. CBD, or the Convention on Biological Diversity, was in 1992, and the nations that sign it agreed to work on reversing the global decline in biodiversity. For any of the treaties or laws that we talk about, if you remember their abbreviation, like if you remember CITES or remember CBD, you don't need to memorize the whole name. U.S. has not actually ratified the CBD as of this date. Some laws that we have passed: the Lacey Act, which prohibits the transport of live or dead animals across state lines. You have to have a federal permit. The Endangered Species Act, it's illegal to import or trade any product made from an endangered species, so you couldn't import like a purse made of tiger fur, for example. And the Endangered Species Act also authorizes the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service to identify what those endangered species are. So they're in charge of listing both terrestrial and aquatic endangered species. Also forbids federal agencies to carry out projects or fund projects that would endanger or jeopardize any of